This is an interesting topic for me to speak on. I've done a lot of public speaking for the IBF. I've done some for APICS in the past. This is probably the most unique presentation that I'm going to give. And it's because this is a very difficult topic to speak about. It would be easy for me to come up here and talk about how to calculate safety stock, or how to make sure we order the right amount of materials. It would be easy to come up here and explain how MAPE works. Talking about communication in the supply chain is not something we discuss often. There's not a lot of publication out there about it, but I will tell you that from my own experience, I believe it is the difference between a good supply chain and a great one. And tonight I want to give a little bit of insight as to why I believe that through some personal experience. And then I'm going to show you a couple things that we do at Pinnacle Foods, as well as in other companies I've worked for in the past, that hopefully will give you some tools to go back to the office with. A little bit more about me. I'm currently a Senior Director of Demand Planning, and if you didn't see in the bio it said Senior Director of Planning. I've recently had a job change. As of 3 months ago, I was leading demand planning, supply planning, and deployment for Pinnacle Foods, Frozen Foods Division. Now I'm leading demand planning for the entire organization. So this is a pretty huge change. It's an area where we need a lot of help and a lot of vision and a lot of change management, Joe. So, right where I feel comfortable. So we're getting started. So I'm here at Pinnacle, been there 2.5 years before then with a large wet wipes manufacturer called Nice Packs Products. Before that, I was with Nestle for 6 years, including Gerber Products Company before the acquisition of Nestle. I spent time at Fujifilm in the imaging industry, had a cup of coffee with Unilever. That wasn't a slight, I literally had a cup of coffee with Unilever. I was there for a year. And then I started my career at BASF Corporation a long time ago. And what's really, really interesting to me as I look around this room, I believe there's somebody who I've worked with at every one of these companies that's here tonight. That's amazing because it goes to show just how small this community really is. You do run into people years down the road that you worked with a long time ago, so be nice to everyone you meet. Don't burn for bridges. I've been on the IBF Board of Advisors since 2008, and it's been a great learning opportunity for me as I help to contribute to their body of knowledge. I'm born and raised in New Jersey. Do not put down Bon Jovi or Bruce Springsteen anywhere near me, or you'd be in trouble. You can put down Jersey Shore. Those are all New Yorkers who come down to our beaches, so that's okay. My hobbies include my kids. When I'm not working, that's where I'm spending my time. I got an 11-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, and that's where my time goes. Lacrosse, I've had the chance to play that most of my life and still coach today. Cycling is my release when I just have had too much of this stuff. If you don't do it, get out on the road, clear your mind. It's one of the best things you can do. And then I love music as well. Okay, so on to our topic. Is communication more important than accuracy? I think the topic is just interesting. It's just a very retrospective question, not something we often think about. And it was actually the title of an article that I wrote in the Journal of Business Forecasting in the fall of 2014. And it was inspired by this quote. And this was a quote by Roger Enrico, Vice Chairman of PepsiCo. I happened to be reading some material that he published, and I saw this quote in here, and I loved it. The soft stuff is always harder than the hard stuff. The soft stuff is always harder than the hard stuff. And sometimes learning the soft stuff has to be done the hard way. So what I thought I would do to start the session tonight is I want to tell you guys a little story. This story it's actually a story I've never told anyone before about something that happened in my career. But it changed my perspective on what I do and why I do it. I think about this story almost every day, okay? And it really has served as my inspiration to be as passionate as I am about what I do. And I hope it'll inspire you, Dr. Phil, how you doing?
Hi, Doc. How you doing?
Good. Great to see you. Okay, well, I was missing someone from Gerber until now. Great to see you.
And ex-mayor employee, too.
There you go. Welcome back.
Well, when I heard you talking about the thing that changed your career, I thought you were talking about me, so
You're my inspiration. So where was I? Yeah, so getting back to the story. Yeah, so this is my inspiration. I'm hoping it inspires you as well. If not, at least you'll know where I'm coming from as I go through the rest of this presentation. And it actually starts, it's amazing to think that this was a decade ago, but it starts 10 years ago when I took a job at Gerber Products Company as a customer logistics manager. I took that job to get out of planning. And it worked out really well for me. I wanted to do something different, and I took this role, and I actually reported into sales, which was great because you get all the benefits of working for sales and going to all the meetings and learning their ways of working. And I was doing that for 18 months, pretty successful. I was saving the company some money and felt really good about that change until one day a guy named Pat O'Malley, who was our chief supply chain officer at Gerber, he came over to my cubicle and he just declared, he said, "John, you work for me now." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm sick and tired of those you-know-whats over in marketing screwing up my supply chain because they don't know how to forecast. And I want to put a forecasting function in my supply chain." So I said, "You mean demand planning?" He said, "Yeah, that's what we should call it." So Pat wasn't a guy he said no to. So here I am, a few days later, going through my proposal for a demand planning organization at Gerber. And it didn't take long before we had a full team, a team of 6. We worked pretty quickly at changing the game. Our SKU level forecast error before we implemented demand planning was 38% at a 1-month lag. When we had gotten through the first 6 months of installing a consensus demand planning process, we had gotten that number down to 14%. You can look at any benchmark you want, in any industry you look at, in the IBF or APICS or Gartner, or you pick your poison, you won't find 14%. It's world class. Now, we work for Gerber, and we have the benefits of, forecasting baby food. Babies, they tend to eat every day, so we have a fairly stable business. So I won't look that gift horse in the mouth. We had 14% forecast error, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. The thing is, we made a pretty substantial change. And here I am with my 14% forecast error going into my monthly meeting with Pat O'Malley, who is now my boss, and ready to give him this charged up speech about how great demand planning was doing. And I sat down, and I got into the 14% make page, and started talking about all the things we're doing differently, but I could tell he wasn't paying any attention. And finally, he cut me off mid-sentence and said, "John, if your forecasting is so great, explain this to me." And he grabs this piece of paper, and he puts it in front of me. And it's an inventory snapshot. And we're $40 million over our target. Ouch. So I said, "I don't know. I came from customer logistics, and now I'm in forecasting. No idea. I haven't done inventory yet at all in this company." And he goes, "Hang on a second. There's something else I want to show you." And this time he reaches in a drawer, and he pulls out another piece of paper, and it shows a 96.5% service rate versus our 98% target. And he says, "If our forecasting is so good, how come these metrics are so bad?" I said, "Honestly, Pat, I don't know. You're kind of putting me on the spot. But you know what? Let me go find out." So I told him I would do a little research. And to do that, I had to go talk to supply planning. The supply planning team actually resided in our plant in Fremont, Michigan, where my counterpart, a guy named Steve, worked. So I flew out there, and I talked to Steve, and I said, "Hey, here's the deal. We've got this MAPE improvement, forecast error. We've got this inventory issue. We've got this service issue. I can't figure out why this isn't better." And he just looks at me and starts laughing. And he says, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "John, we don't use your forecast." because I wouldn't touch your forecast with a 10-foot pole. That thing's been wrong for years. You came in, and I know you're saying stuff, but I don't trust you, and I don't believe a word you say, and I throw that forecast out the door. We've been doing this for 10 years now. We understand the business, and I'm planning what I think is going to happen.
Oh.
Wow. I said, okay, found a problem. So I went back and reconnected with Pat. I told him what was going on. And he was concerned and asked me how to fix it. So I said, well, why don't you promote me and give me supply planning? He did. So I picked up supply planning, and what I did was I actually centralized supply planning into the corporate headquarters. We took it out of the plant and moved it into our Parsippany, New Jersey office. And we did something very different with demand planning at the same time. Because we had demand and supply under the same umbrella, I made it a mandate for the demand planning team to start providing all this context. Don't just pass them the forecast, because that's what Steve was getting from us. He was getting these numbers that he didn't believe. Pass them the forecast and tell them why. Get into, what assumptions are changing. Give them a reason to believe our numbers. Put some bandwidth against it. Talk about what the opportunities might be. And if we're capacity constrained, we want to have that conversation early on so we can pre-build if something were to happen. Let's get into that type of conversation. With that, and after starting to implement our S&OP process, it was about 8-9 months later, Pat O'Malley hung 2 banners up in our corporate headquarters for the entire company and all of our visitors to see. The first banner said, congratulations on a $40 million reduction in inventory. And the one right below that said, congratulations on a 98.2% service level, highest in this company in the last decade. Now, he did it politically correct. He put finance, supply chain, METS, marketing, sales. The whole company felt good about it. And obviously in planning, we took a lot of pride in those numbers. And it was interesting as I reflected on what forced that change. How we got there was not how I expected it. But that's really background to what I want to tell you and what my inspiration is. My inspiration really came a couple years later, after I resigned from Nestle, and my boss had asked me to go out to this Fremont, Michigan facility one last time with the person who would be taking my role moving forward. It's a complex plan. He said, just please show them around, make sure you get them up to speed on how this thing works. So I took him out there and we had these meetings. I've been out there probably 3 to 4 dozen times in the 6 years I was with Gerber/Nestle. And we got done with our meetings, we're walking out the door. We're literally out of the plant, we're walking through the main office towards the parking lot, and we're late. We gotta catch a flight. So we're not talking, we're walking, and right in front of the door there's this hallway, perpendicular hallway, and some guy comes around the corner. And he's got the plant coat on, and his safety goggles, and his hairnet, and his clipboard, and he's got his head down, and he's walking really fast. 2 ships in the night, we pass each other. And then I hear the footsteps stop, and I hear him say, hey, John. He said, do you remember me? And I turned around, and it's a guy that I did recognize, but I hadn't seen in a couple years. He was a first-line shift supervisor at this plant, who was put on this new technology we implemented several years ago. So I was actually on the line with him for quite a bit of time, 3 to 4 years ago. So I got to know him pretty well, but I hadn't seen him since then. And I'm terrible with names. So I was fortunate because this guy had like a great Midwestern name you just couldn't forget. His name was Colt. His name was Colt Johnson. So of course, I said, Colt, of course I remember you. How you doing, How the kids? So we start talking, and he stops and he says, John, I know you're leaving, I heard, but I'm glad I ran into you because I just wanted to say thank you for what you guys did with the demand planning thing in corporate and connecting that to the supply chain, because it really changed things for us here in the plant. And I brushed it off. I said, oh, thanks. We glad we made an impact, and happy to hear, great to see you, we got to run. Took a step toward the door. Colt doesn't take a hint very well. So he says, so we stopped. I'm with Bob, we stopped. And Bob's the guy who's taking my role. So he says, you don't know what it was like before. I'd come into the plant some days, and there'd be nothing for us to do. Other days, I'd be at home and I get called into the plant on an emergency basis because we had a run. Sometimes I'd come into the plant and they would say, I don't need to do anything for the next 3 weeks because we were in inventory control mode, and I wouldn't receive a paycheck for half a month or more. Ouch. You think about the impact that poor planning has on people. Wow. But I'm still not listening because I'm late. And I go right to the banners, right? I'm like, yeah, we had the working capital reduction and fill rates and this and that. Colt, great to see you got everybody. He goes, you know. So we started. Because there was this one time where I promised my boy, that's what you say when you're from Michigan, I promised my boy I'd take him fishing on a Saturday. And I got called into the plant, so I had to go. And I left the house before he woke up. His son must have been 5 or 6 or 7, somewhere around there. And he said, so I went to the plant all day, and I knew he would be disappointed. So I got home, and as I approached the house, I saw my wife standing there at the screen door with her arms folded, and she didn't look very happy. And she said, you know what she said to me? And I'll never forget the way Colt phrased these words. This is what I think about every day. His wife said, you know, Colt, you know what your son said today? I said, no. Your son said, you know what, Mom? Sometimes I just close my eyes and pretend that Daddy's here so that this way I can have fun when I play. Now, it breaks your heart. Now, Colt wasn't the kind of guy that would shed a tear, but he was welling up pretty good when we said it. I'm actually a little emotional. Like I said, I've never told this story. I'm a little emotional just thinking about it. But it's really amazing when you think about the impact of what we do as a supply chain, as forecasters, as planning organization, and the impact we have on people. And I can tell you that we've all gone to school and we've all taken courses in supply chain, or MRP2 as it was called, but not if you're my age, not to date myself. And you go through all the textbooks and you learn how to do analytics. And then you get your job and you come in and you pull pivot tables down, you sort all this data, and you look at a spreadsheet and say, yeah, that number right there, that's why I got to make this decision. I can guarantee you that nowhere in those textbooks and nowhere in those spreadsheets is there a consideration for the fact that your poor decision making is ruining someone's family. And that was the other thing he said to me. When you guys made that change, he said, you saved a lot of marriages. Wow. Very impactful stuff, right? So, when I'm about to make a decision in terms of what I want to do with inventory strategy, or if I want to allow bias into the forecast, I think about that story. And I'll say this, I've had some really good fortune in my career, really since Dr. Jan and Anish were kind enough to allow me onto the IDF Board of Advisors to know some of the brightest people in our field. Larry Lapidi, the head of supply chain research for MIT. Tom Wallace, now retired, but the godfather of S&OP, as Joe calls him. Dr. Jan, the founder of the IDF, the editor of Journal of Business Forecasting, in his spare time, professor at St. John's on forecasting, and countless other professionals who are much smarter than I could ever aspire to be, whose brains I constantly pick, so I can get better at what I do. But I'll tell you this, if you were to ask me who has taught me the most about planning, I will tell you the answer is Colt Johnson, first line shift supervisor for Nestle. And that's a true story. And that's why I wanted to pick this topic tonight. So, inspiring? See heads nodding? Put your hands up like this, I feel like I'm in a rock concert. Yeah. Stephanie, you had to take, you missed that shot. All right. So let's break it down. Demand planning and supply chain management. That's where the linkage needs to be. Demand and supply, as Joe said. How do we communicate? Well, there's kind of the traditional way of doing it. The way that everyone here could probably say, yeah, this is what we do. Demand planning, creates a forecast. It's an array, it's a series of numbers. We have something that I'll call ad hoc send. Things come up, we get information, we pass that information on, whatever it is, to the supply planning team. Hey guys, this new SKU is going to launch in December. Okay. Performance metrics. Here's how we're doing, supply chain. On the receiving end, supply chain takes the forecast and they get a demand signal. Again, it's a number. Something that we send is received. Got it. New product launch in December. Got to remember that. Performance metrics become information for root cause analysis. So we know some supply chain disruption is driven by the forecast. And when that occurs, we can now help them as to why. How does this happen? Well, typically, the forecast gets transferred to demand in an advanced planning system. You know, some of you probably use the most popular advanced planning system in the world, Excel. Ad hoc, I mean, this is normally emails or just over-the-wall conversations. And performance metrics, you know, MAPE, your mean absolute percent error, bias, and so forth. But then we have to go above and beyond. And this is where you got to ask yourself the question, do I do this? Does my company advocate this? And as I said early on, this is where the difference lies between a good supply chain and a great one. I really do believe it comes down to communication between demand and supply. Opportunities and risks. Hey guys, here's what we think is going to happen, right? Up here. But here's the bandwidth we're working within. Here's all the possibilities. The tracking of leading indicators. We're not sure if this is going to happen or not, but we're tracking this, and we're going to let you know if we see a shift. And then the why and the storyline. Context. Here's why we believe this forecast. It's our reason to believe, and we want it to be your reason to believe. So you don't go rogue on us and pull a Steve. Okay. Scenario plans, opportunities and risks become scenario plans. Tracking of leading indicators become trigger points, and we're going to talk a little bit about trigger points as we get through the deck. And the why and the storyline becomes part of your trade-off decision-making process. Hard to make a decision if you don't know why you're making a decision. And I find way too many times people go to that spreadsheet and that number and say that number means I need to make this decision, and they don't know why. That's a mistake. The way to make the connections here is through process. We do it through S&OP. We did it that way at Gerber. We implemented it in IcePack. We implemented it at Pinnacle Foods. Now, we have an S&OP process, but we also have a weekly planning cadence as well that runs underneath this. And I'll show you how those connection points work, both in that monthly S&OP and that weekly cadence. That's where we're focused. Now, takeaways from this session, if you're in demand planning, defining and building the process around the information that your largest internal customer really needs. That's what you want to get out of this session. My biggest internal customer is my supply chain. They need my forecast, but they also need a lot more to really understand how they can best support demand. If you're in supply planning, well, I'm going to give you a platform to hold your demand planning team accountable to, number one. You know, you tell them I need this stuff. I'm not getting this, and I went to this IBF and APICS conference, and they said I need this. So give it to me, you know? I demand it. But there's nothing wrong for asking for more context. And understanding that it works both ways, and we're not going to get into it in this session. Maybe some other time, some other place. Back here at Bayer, when Joe buys the food. We'll have a conversation on what supply planning needs to deliver back to the demand organization. Okay? So I'm going to start with opportunities and risks. And This slide here represents the way that we try to categorize risks and ops for our supply chain. Very, very simple. This, you don't have to look at the numbers, they're not going to tell you much, but look at the graph. This solid line here represents by quarter for a brand or an asset base, depending on our S&OP category, what our demand plan is. This is the actual number you'll find in our system that you are planning to. Then you've got the opportunities which go above. You've got the risks that are below. So part of our S&OP process. A few Pinnacle people here. Does this look familiar, guys? These are passed on to the supply chain in a time-phased forecast for their evaluation. And it's used for scenario planning where risk exists and further discussions are required. For example, after supply planning looks at the opportunities, they may say, hey, I can't support that Q3 number based on the current plan. We're going to have a service issue. They may look at the risk here in Q2 and say, whoa, if that number drops by that much, we're going to have an obsolescence problem. Basic scenario planning, but context that we need to provide on a regular basis. Now, what would be likely to happen to the supply chain if the Q2 risks, so the red on the bottom, and the Q3 opportunities, the red on the top, come to fruition? I've been through this before, I'm sure all of you have as well. You get to here, and you say, oh my God, shut the plant down. Well, we're gonna have excess inventory. So you shut the plant down. And then this happens not too far after that, and then you go, oh my God, run the plant. Put on overtime. Go to get some co-packers. We gotta get extra capacity. We can't possibly meet this surge. Bring cost into the equation. Whatever it takes, we gotta service the customers. So, show of hands, anybody ever been through this before? Oh man, it's like everyone. Yeah, so not uncommon. But if you think about just a little bit of information in terms of context to say, hey, these are things that might happen, how would you plan for this? Maybe here, earlier in the process. Giving that visibility and scenario planning to say, well, I tell you, if I start pre-building here and I take a little bit of inventory here and I get a co-packer here so I don't have obsolescence, whatever it is, whatever that plan is from supply chain, you now have a path you can walk down to be successful in hitting your metrics. Now, here's the other question. Let's say we go through all this crazy demand signal change, and we don't provide any information to supply planning. Who's accountable for the service issue?
Who gets held accountable?
Who gets held accountable?
The supply chain.
The supply planning, absolutely, the supply chain does. So let's back up a minute. Back up. We didn't provide you this. You had no visibility that any of this was going to happen. Then this actually happens. You're surprised, and it's just going through things I've heard before. We need to fix supply planning. We're not doing a good job. We need to find out why we're being surprised by this. How could we have service issues in the middle of our peak season? Supply planning is accountable. I'm telling you right now, it's not the marketing team or the sales team that helped to develop these forecasts that are sitting in that room answering those questions. Not the demand planning team either. Unless the supply planning team says, no, you got it wrong. Go talk to those guys. That's happened. But hey guys, one team, right? We gotta figure it out together. Here's the other thing. Let's say we give the right visibility, we make the right decisions early on in the process, and we skirt the problem. We execute with excellence. What does the demand planning metric actually look like here if we don't actually change the forecast until we get really close?
Terrible.
It's going to be terrible. It's going to look poor. Might not have 14%, I'll tell you that. But, well, if you think about it, we skirted a business issue, we made the right decisions, we kept demand and supply in balance, and I've got a lousy looking forecast error. What value is that metric at all?
Supply looks good though.
Supply looks good though. So the bottom line is, when I say, is communication more important than accuracy? Here's an example where the answer to that is absolutely. I don't really care what this number is. I care. It shows up on my jacket, so I care. But it's really not relevant to what we were able to do. A little thing called talking to one another can make that happen. And you can't find any textbook that's going to tell you you can have a poor mate with great service and great inventory levels. Just where we're at. But it can happen, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in multiple companies. Now, let's move on away from opportunities and risks. And by the way, I thought I'd call this out. Everyone talks about risks and opportunities. How about we plan for growth? Talk about the opportunities first. Opportunities and risks. That's what we call it in Pinnacle. Tracking of leading indicators. So this is really the next way that we can communicate. I know this might be hard to see if you're in the back, so I'll do my best to walk through it. In this particular situation, we're going to look at a new product launch. One of the trickiest things to forecast and plan for and service and not have obsolescence on, right? So we break it down to the leading indicators. And what you see up here is in terms of velocity and distribution. So we're a consumer goods company, food company. We can see how many points of distribution we're in, how many stores, and how many units per store are we moving, that's velocity. So distribution is how many stores, velocity, how many units am I moving in those stores. So we actually decompose our forecast into these assumptions. And then down here, this is just a snapshot of our shipment forecast, which you can see in the bars. That's what we think shipments will be, our sales, versus point of sale, consumption data from the retailer. We believe consumption will be this. There's a little bump here, maybe that's a promotion that's going on, and we're going to ship ahead of that, and we got a plan. Okay, so these up here helped us to build this consumption forecast, which we believe we will service through this shipment plan, because that's how we think retailers will buy. Pretty simple, right? Make sense? Okay. Then, once we have this information, we talk to the supply chain. Weekly. Okay? And there's a few folks here who are actually actively doing this for us. And the reason we talk weekly is to get into the why and the context. So let's take the same example, but I'm going to fast forward 8 weeks now. We now have 8 weeks worth of actuals after our launch. So these bars on the left are what we forecasted, the bars on the right are what actually happened in terms of distribution. This dotted line is still my forecasted velocity, here's my actual velocity. And that translates into shipments versus consumption in the same way down below. So what's happened? Well, we haven't changed the forecast. This forecast here, back it up, is the same chart you see there. Haven't changed anything. But we can see that consumption, point of sale, outtake, is much lower than we expected it to be. So we've already got an issue. This new item launch isn't performing as well as we thought it would. Now, because we've built some assumptions, we can get into why. And we can have that conversation with supply planning. Overall, distribution, the number of stores we expect it to be in, is pretty much in line with what we thought would happen. That's not the issue. All the customers we thought would take this, they took it. Check. The issue is the units per store. We thought the units per store per week would get up around 7. We're sitting somewhere around 3 right now, so we're way off. And as a result, consumption, point of sale is way down. And then if you look at the shipment comparison, hey, we had a great pipeline. So we started off like gangbusters shipping out the door. And then you really haven't had a good week against your forecast since then. Maybe this one here, 2 weeks ago. But you really haven't come close on shipments because the retailers don't need the inventory at this point. So here's kind of what, in best practices, a weekly meeting with the right people would look like. Again, talking through it, communicating it. And in this context, we did this with a launch called Recipe Ready on our Bird's Eye brand. We launched about 2 years ago. Probably the best example I can give you, 20 new items exclusively at Walmart. Tell me that's not obsolescence waiting to happen. We had almost none because we did this. So the weekly meeting, we get sales, we get marketing, we get demand planning, we get supply planning, and materials management in a room. And it goes like this. So the demand planning, Lisa calls and says, hey, our shipment forecast has missed significantly this week. In each of the last 3 weeks since the pipeline, it appears to be velocity driven. Any update, guys? The salesperson says, yeah, actually some of our national retailers, they're achieving those velocity hurdles of 7 units per store. But there's an issue regionally, especially in the Southeast United States. We're not seeing anywhere near that. And we think that's the cause of the problem. Good information to know. Hey, if I'm a supply planning resource, I'm thinking about my deployment team, who's moving a ton of inventory right now to our Atlanta distribution center. And I'm going, whoa, that might be where the biggest problem is. Marketing says, hey, you know what? Let me go back and look at the consumer acceptance testing. Maybe there's something in the demographics that might help us to unlock what's going on in the Southeast. Hey, it's probably too early for us to reduce the forecast at this point. So you go back here, right? I know, it probably gets crazy with the clicker. So you go back to here and you say, well, you know what? I see it's not great yet, but we have a chance of hitting this if things pick up. It's really not that far of a stretch, and hey, maybe consumers just don't know about it yet. And maybe this little promotion here is going to help us get there. Don't know. I can't take the forecast down yet. So let's leave the forecast where it is. And then, the question is, well, when do we should think about holding off our next production at least, even though I'm not changing the forecast. When's our next run? So supply planning says, hey, we're producing again in 3 weeks, 40,000 units. Seems pretty high, guys. Well, I agree. It was based on our original assumptions. It feels very high considering that we've only shipped 19,000 units, including the pipeline. So now we're going to plan to produce more than double what we've shipped in an 8-week period. Ooh, that seems really risky. Then you got the materials management team that speaks up and says, well, hey guys, I'm placing orders for the materials on Tuesday, so I need to know if you're producing this or not. Hey guys, does it make sense to move the production back just by 2 weeks? Give us a couple more weeks of gathering additional data, see how we compare against the weekly forecast going forward, and then why don't we revisit the decision again? Maybe we have to delay again. Maybe we make the production, maybe it's less of a quantity. We'll figure it out when we have more information. Yeah, we can make that change with the plant, sure. We'll set it up. Cool. And that's how that conversation works. And that's pretty much word for word how this Recipe Ready launch was being managed. So I mentioned trigger points early on. Trigger point is the point in time where you needed to make a decision, a trade-off decision. Did anyone see in that little story where the trigger point really was to make a decision? You guys speak up.
Build point. So we decided to build it up.
Two trigger points.
Okay?
One was in the sales that were not anticipated because they weren't met, and then the second was in the variability in your supply.
The variability in your supply. Okay. So if we go with that and we say within the supply and the variability we're now dealing with, because we're not meeting demand, and we've got this variability, what is the one point where a decision needed to be made or we would have cost the company money? I'll put the story back up.
Buy the raw materials. Raw materials. You gotta buy the raw materials.
When you had to buy the raw materials. Yeah, as this person right here called it out, hey, I'm placing the order, and once I place the order, even if you never produce it, you're writing off materials. Right? We've all been there? Okay, so that's the trigger point. And we happen to make the decision right at the trigger point. And we save the company $24 million. I don't know, probably some packaging costs, I have no idea how much that's worth. But you save the company some money. Hey, if you produced, it could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings, or write-offs. In this quick conversation, what was the team able to accomplish? Who wants to take a shot at it? What was the team able to accomplish?
Reduced inventory levels, I would say, better service level, and you are
Okay, you know what?
customer.
Hang on, there you go. So everyone can hear it.
Thanks, John, for talking to us. My name is Neha, and I would like to say that a reduced inventory level, better service level, and you are also being able to cater to the variability as said by someone else. I totally agree. You are also catering to the point of demographically how the product is being accepted in different demographies. So that's my point.
Great answer. Could you imagine if we didn't have this meeting? It almost would seem ridiculous, having gone through this, for us not to have this meeting. But how often are we sitting in a meeting like this? You know? I'm sure some companies it's often, other companies probably never. And a lot of us probably somewhere in between. You're dealing with the variability, right? That's really what drives us. You're talking about the variability. Why were they able to accomplish it? Well, they were proactive and they were an engaged team. I keep walking out of the camera. Sorry.
That's all right.
Hey, what do you think my forecast error, my bias are going to be on this item? Remember, I didn't change the forecast. Bad.
Ugly.
Do I care? Yes, I care. It's part of my objectives. But is it meaningful?
No.
Is it relevant? No. It's not at all. We made the right call. And you know what? In 2 weeks, if we're still missing, we'll probably take that forecast down and get it right, and we'll move forward with better signals to the supply chain. Cool? Yeah. Yeah, just answer that question. So, funny to go back to this, right? So back up again. Back up here. Funny to go back to this, right? When you think about Colt Johnson and the impact that if we didn't have this meeting, if we went ahead and we built all this inventory, and let's say that this new product launch was 50% of that plant's capabilities, what happens to Colt?
Got the rest of the year off.
Got the rest of the year off, and he's looking for work because he's like, this place is too unpredictable for me. Right? Again, we're not thinking about any of that while we're having this conversation, but Colt's pretty glad we are. Okay, I mentioned early on that in terms of context and in terms of better communication, it's really, the connectivity is really driven through process. It needs to be formalized. It can't just be, demand planning resource shouting over the wall to the supply planning resource. It can't be, an email with 40 people copied on it going back and forth to the point where you stop reading them. It's not going to work. You need to have a formalized way of doing this that's embedded in the DNA of the S&OP process so that no matter where in the company it's being done, it's standardized, and if somebody in the organization moves to another position, a new person coming in knows, okay, this is what I have to do. You can't just live on the fact that you've got one good communicator and things are going great because this person thinks ahead. That's not sustainable. So, a little bit of insight into our monthly S&OP process, and for those of you at NicePack, this might look familiar. For those of you at Gerber, this might look familiar. This is pretty much the standard way of doing things now. We start with a sales and demand planning promotional review. I want all the insights from the field on promotions that are changing, distribution changes that are out there, competitive activity. We go through all that stuff with each major sales team. Then we have a tactical forecast work session. Here we get down into the numbers. It's very tactical. We're down at the product group level, sub-brand, so to speak, level. And it's a meeting with demand planning, marketing, brand management, sales, internal sales, finance, FP&A. It's really kind of the manager level of the organization. And this meeting is several hours long. Think of people with their laptops open, kind of, papers all over the table, and a collaborative discussion trying to tie out on a number with different points of view. We formalized into this meeting now. We weren't doing this even 6 months ago, but now in this meeting, we define our opportunities and our risks. So we don't just talk about the numbers. When we align, we say, okay, now what are the possibilities? And even more importantly for our process, what are the actionable gap closers? Because here's what's going to happen. No matter what business you're in, your objectives for your company are usually stretch targets. That's the way your management's going to set them, right? That's why people invest in your company. So they're stretch targets, which means you're probably going to have a gap. You're probably not going to be able to meet that original demand without doing something. So if I have an unbiased forecast, and I've got a team doing a bottom-up build to come into an unbiased forecast, chances are there's going to be a gap between our number and the number the company needs to achieve. So as we come out of the meeting, we're thinking in terms of opportunities and risks, but also, what are the actionable opportunities? I can go secure more trade funds, and I can go run more promotions. I can maybe move that new innovation item up, by 2 months and get a little more volume there. I can, go out and get some distribution in the food channel with a distribution drive, whatever. There's tons of options here, but we list them. Then we go into category demand review. Similar meeting, higher level. The VP is sitting in here now. And we formally define the gaps between the financial and demand plans. And then we enable the gap closers. We actually, in this meeting, talk about, okay, we're off by X million dollars. Putting these things in play will help close that gap. Let's commit to doing it. What will it take? And then from there we go into, this is kind of the executive consensus forecast meeting. We go in for sign off with business leadership. Here's the issue, here's the gap, here's what we're doing about it, and here's how the forecast looks as a result. Okay? So you can see that in our S&OP process, opportunities and risks and trade-off decisions and action plans, all embedded at various stages of the process. You can't go through a meeting without talking about it. Because you're going to get asked here. On the supply side, we have some other formalized meetings, a plant performance review. Well, here's where we run those scenario plans based on the O&Rs. Right? So we go back to that slide that had the bars, right, the dotted lines, and we said, well, supply planning, scenario planning, we can avoid the obsolescence or the service. This is where they do that math and say, we've done the scenario plan, here's what we need to avoid the issue. Then there's a leadership review, so we finalize those recommendations to manage the O&R impacts, O&R being opportunity and risks, along with how we're going to support the forecast. And then in the executive S&OP, this is a really cool thing. When you get to executive S&OP, which at Pinnacle we're just now starting to get a good rolling cadence that gets us a good meeting here. This is pretty new for us, but it's been well defined in other companies I've seen. This is where it becomes great. You provide recommendations and make decisions on the trade-offs. You can actually have that demand and supply balancing conversation, not just on the forecast, but on what could happen, right? So that's pretty powerful. And at the end of the day, because I'm talking about opportunities and risks, I can define my S&OP process in 3 words. Beat the plan. That's what this process does. It allows us to beat the plan. I mentioned, it doesn't always work out that way, but that's okay. I mentioned the weekly planning process, and that there's really 2 levels. So that was the monthly S&OP cadence, where we bake in the opportunity and risk and the context and the communication. In the weekly process, we do the same thing. So we have a weekly rolling cadence where on Mondays, we all do certain activities, on Tuesdays and so on. So early in the week, and again, this is relatively new for us at Pinnacle, we define key misses versus the prior week forecast. So we want to know why we had certain SKUs that were much higher than the forecast or much lower, and does that impact the forecast going forward, and should I update the short-term plan? We determine root causes, any leading indicators, and then we update our forecast, any short-term risks or opportunities we should call out, and then any of these predictive trackers, like the new item tracker. While we're doing that, supply planning, similar cadence, different set of data. They're looking at their key misses against their production and their inventory plans. So, do we have an attainment issue at the plant? Or do they over-attain? Or did the product go on hold that's no longer available to us? Did our inventory target get revised? And we now need to go chase something else. We determine root cause inclusive of planning rates at the plants and other assumptions. And then there's this meeting, which we're formalizing right now. And we use this actually ad nauseum in Gerber, and it worked really well for us. So there's a meeting with demand planning and supply planning. And for the new items, we'll bring in the sales and marketing team to review the context of the forecast changes in the ONRs. And that's the commentary that you saw before. And then we make decisions to balance the demand and supply based on these predictive trackers, such as new item launch trackers or any opportunities and risks. So this is more of a short-term conversation. What do we think might happen in the next 8 weeks or so? You know, we've got, we've got to hit a quarter-end inventory target. Well, we're way off now because sales are soft. How are we going to do it? You know, those type of things come up in the short-term conversation, whereas the S&OP is a little more at the macro level. But again, the common theme here is opportunities and risks, getting the right trackers out there, and the context, explaining the why. Making sure that everyone has the same reason to believe, and that we're aligned as one team moving forward. And that is a really tricky topic to talk about. I will tell you, I'm sweating up here. But I see a lot of people taking notes and nodding their heads, and like it feels like you guys are getting it. And I just a quick poll, just shake your heads or one way or the other. I mean, it's insightful, is it helpful? Yes. A lot of people nodding yes, rock spark yes. All right. Awesome. Well, I'm glad. The story, you found the story inspirational too, right?
Oh,
yeah.
great.
Yeah, cool.